Good morning, summer readers. My name is Jenifer Strauss, and I'm a storyteller. My business is Story Be Told, and I am so excited to be with you for Summer Reading 2020, where I invite you into the Zoom storytelling room, and together we're going to imagine our stories. Now, I always like to start with a welcome song. And you'll probably know this welcome song because it's called The More We Get Together. But I'm going to add some sign language to it to make it a little bit more interesting. So let me teach you the signs that go with this welcome song. The first word we need to learn in sign language is more. So I want you to bring your hands up together like this, like two mouths of an animal. But we're going to bring our fingertips together right here, and that's more, more. The word together, you're going to put your fists together. Make sure your thumbs are out front and make a circle in front of you for together. Together. Happy, take a flat hand and sort of pat your own shoulder. Happy. And then the word be. Going to make a flag with your hand, tuck your thumb in, and straight out from your mouth. Be. And my favorite sign in this song is the sign for friends. So take your two index fingers and curl them around each other on this side, and then curl them around each other on this side, friends. So the more we get together, the happier we'll be, because your friends are my friends. You ready for the welcome song? Let's sing it. The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be, 'cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. All right, let's pick it up just a little bit this time, right? The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be, 'cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. Nice job, everyone. So we're going to be imagining our stories today. And when I think about imagining my favorite stories, I always think of the ones that are filled with magic, right? You know, the ones that have elves and leprechauns, or gnomes and fairies with magic wands. So the elders have told us that the little people have always lived around us, and we can see them if we want to. So I invite you to join me into the land of magical little people for stories and songs today. The first thing I want to teach you, though, are 5 fairy facts. And these facts are true of all the little people, all the fairy folk. So fact number 1, and you can count them with me. Number 1, all the little people have 9 lives and then 9 more. So some of them are incredibly old. Fairy fact number 2. If you were lucky enough to be born on a Sunday, or you were lucky enough to find a 4-leaf clover growing in a fairy ring, well, you are the kind of person that will always be able to see the little people if you want to. Fairy fact number 3. Now, if you're someone who just doesn't want to see the little people, or you never want to encounter them at all, well, you're going to have to wear your clothes inside out every day from this day forward. It's true. Fairy fact number 4. If you leave a bowl of milk out at night and the fairy people come and drink it, why, the next day they will have to do all your chores for you. And if you can discover what their name is and speak their name out loud, they will be your friend for life and always bound to you. Fairy fact number 5. And this is true of all the little people too. They love mischief. What do I mean by that? They like to play jokes on humans. Now, they never mean any harm. They think it's kind of funny, but they like to play jokes on humans. The other thing you need to know is that the little people can never tell a lie, and that's a good thing. If they make a promise to you, they have to keep that promise. So keep those facts in mind as we enter the world of the little people. The bright stars are shining, the moon is alight. The folk of the forest are dancing tonight. Swift, they say, is a song that they sing as they float and they sway and they dance in a ring. Oh, seek not to find them, the wee ones so fair. They're shy like a swallow and swift as the air. If you come, they are gone like a snowflake in May, like a hush, like a sigh, they vanish away. So the first story I'd like to share with you today is a very old one, and you may have heard of it before. It's from the Brothers Grimm, and it's called The Shoemaker and the Elves. And it goes like this. A long time ago, in a small village, there lived a shoemaker. He lived together with his wife in a small cottage, and attached to their home was a workshop where every day the shoemaker made the most beautiful shoes and sold them to the people of that village. But there came a day when hard times fell on the shoemaker and his wife. Such hard times that they only had enough money to buy the leather for one more pair of shoes. Now that evening in the workshop, the shoemaker very carefully cut out the pieces of leather for that last pair of shoes. And he hoped and prayed that in the shop the next day, he would sell those shoes for a good price. He carefully laid those pieces of leather out on his workbench, and then leaving all cares to heaven, he went upstairs to go to sleep. But that night, when the great grandfather clock that stood at the bottom of the stairs struck midnight, all of a sudden the workshop door flew open and in came two elves. They were naked elves. Those two little naked elves clasped hands and danced around the table. They jumped up on the workbench, and when they saw those pieces of leather, why, they got right to work. They threaded a needle and they started stitching those pieces of leather together so fast you could hardly follow their hands. And when they were finished, there was a beautiful pair of shoes lying on the workbench. Those two elves, well, they danced around that pair of shoes that they had made. They jumped down onto the floor and they danced around the table. And then whoosh, they were out the door just as quickly as they had come. Now, the next morning, the shoemaker got up and he came down the steps into the workshop ready to sew those shoes together. But when he looked down at his workbench, he saw that someone had already made the shoes for him. He picked those shoes up and looked at them. He said, "It looks like these have been made by a craftsman that is a master craftsman. Why, these are beautiful." That day in his shop, he sold that pair of shoes for more money than he had ever made for a pair of shoes. And now he had enough money to buy the leather for two more pairs of shoes. That night in the workshop, he carefully cut out the pieces of leather for those two pairs of shoes. He laid those pieces of leather down on the workbench. He wondered who it had been who had come in the middle of the night and sewn that pair of shoes for him the night before. He wondered if they were going to come again. But leaving all cares to heaven, he went up the stairs and he went to sleep. But that night, just as the great grandfather clock that stood at the bottom of the stairs struck midnight, all of a sudden the workshop door flew open and in came those two little naked elves. Why, they danced around the table, they jumped up on the workbench, they danced around the pieces of leather, and then they got right to work. They threaded a needle and they started stitching those pieces of leather together so fast that you could hardly follow those stitches. And in no time at all, there were two beautiful pairs of shoes resting on the workbench. The elves danced around those shoes. They jumped down onto the floor. They danced around the table, and then whoosh, they were out the door just as quickly as they had come. Now, the next morning, why, the shoemaker woke up and he came down the steps into his workshop. He looked down at the workbench, and once again, the pieces of leather that he had laid out the night before had been stitched into 2 pairs of beautiful shoes. He looked again and said, "They're perfect." That day in his shop, he sold those 2 pair of shoes for even more money than the day before. And now he had enough money to buy leather for 4 more pairs of shoes. That night in the workshop, he very carefully cut out those pieces of leather. He laid them down on the workbench. He wondered who it was who had been doing his work for him in the middle of the night, and he wondered if they would come back again. But leaving all cares to heaven, he went upstairs to go to sleep. But as he climbed in bed next to his wife, that night he said, "I wonder who it is who has been stitching those shoes together in the middle of the night. They have made us quite wealthy. I wonder who's been doing that." His wife thought for a minute and she said, "I tell you what, we won't go to sleep tonight. We're going to go down into the workshop. We'll hide behind the great big curtains and we'll see who it is who has been stitching those shoes together for us." And so that night, instead of going to sleep, the shoemaker and his elf came downstairs, and not his elf, his wife came downstairs, wrapped themselves in the curtains and peeked out. And when the great grandfather clock at the base of the stairs struck midnight, the workshop door flew open, and once again, those 2 little naked elves came dancing in. They danced around the table, they jumped up onto the workbench, and when they saw the pieces of leather, they got right to work. They threaded a needle and started stitching those shoes together so fast that the shoemaker and his wife could hardly follow their stitches. And in no time at all, there were 4 pairs of beautiful shoes lying on the workbench. Those elves danced around the shoes. They jumped down onto the floor and they danced around the table. And then whoosh, they were out the door just as quickly as they had come. That morning at breakfast, the shoemaker said, "Those little elves had made us wealthy. There must be some way that we can thank them." And the shoemaker's wife thought about that. And she said, "You know, they must get very cold running around with nothing to cover them. I tell you what, today I'm going to knit them 2 little pairs of socks. Then I'm going to make them 2 little shirts and 2 little pairs of pants. And while I'm doing that, you go into the workshop and make them 2 little elf-sized pairs of leather shoes. Tonight, we won't leave pieces of leather on the workbench. Instead, we'll leave the clothes that we have made for them to give them our thanks." And so they got busy, and the shoemaker's wife, she knit 2 pairs of socks. And then she made 2 little shirts. And she stitched together 2 pairs of pants. And while she was doing that, the shoemaker very carefully made 2 tiny pairs of leather shoes. Now that evening, instead of placing pieces of leather on the workbench, why, they laid out the socks and the 2 shirts, the 2 pairs of pants, and the 2 little pairs of shoes. And you know what? They didn't go to sleep that night either. The shoemaker and his wife hid behind the curtains in the workshop because they wanted to see the reaction that the elves had when they saw the clothes. And when that great grandfather clock at the bottom of the stairs struck midnight, the workshop door flew open and in came those 2 little elves, and they danced around the table and they jumped up onto the workbench expecting to get to work. But when they saw the clothes that was left for them, they were so excited. They pulled on the socks. They put on the little pants. They put on the little shirts and buttoned them up. And the last thing they put on were the leather shoes that shoemaker had made for them with so much care. They loved their new clothes, and they danced together around the table, and then they jumped down onto the floor and they danced around the table, and then whoosh, they were out the door just as quickly as they had come. After that night, the shoemaker and his wife never saw those elves again. But from that day forward, everything went well for the shoemaker and his wife. And you know what? They lived happily ever after. And that's one of my favorite old stories about elves. So I was happy to share that with you, and I hope you enjoyed it. So the next story that we're going to share is about leprechauns. And we know a lot about leprechauns. We celebrate them every year on a holiday called St. Patrick's Day. It's on March 17th. And on that holiday, you might see people dressed up as leprechauns with tall green hats and maybe overalls and curled toes on their shoes. Well, on that holiday, we've also learned that leprechauns always have a stash of gold. And they usually bury it somewhere so no one will ever find it. Now, we also have been told that if we follow the beautiful colors of a rainbow to the other side, what would we find? Pot of gold. And I hear that's where most leprechauns have claimed their fortune in gold, at the other side of a rainbow. So we also know from fairy fact number 5 that the little people love to play tricks on humans. And in this story, you're going to see how that plays out. It's called Tom and the Leprechaun, and it goes like this. One day long ago, on the Lady Day holiday at harvest time, Tom Fitzpatrick left his house to take a long and rambling walk down the dirt road. It was a beautiful day as he walked along when all of a sudden Tom Fitzpatrick heard a strange noise in the bushes next to the road. It was a clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. And curious, Tom Fitzpatrick went over to those bushes and he parted the branches to see where the sound was coming from. And way down in those bushes, Tom Fitzpatrick saw a leprechaun. He looked up and said, "Oh, a leprechaun. If I can capture him, he'll have to show me where his gold is buried. Today I will gain my fortune." But he had to be careful. So he opened those branches of the bushes again and he looked down. He was trying really hard not to blink because he knew that if he blinked his eyes, there was a good chance that that leprechaun would get away. Instead, he tipped his hat and said, "Good day, sir." The leprechaun didn't look up. He just said, "Good day." Now, when Tom looked down, he saw that the leprechaun was wearing a leather apron and a 3-pointed hat. He was sitting on a little stool next to a gallon-sized jug, and there was a ladder that went to the very top of that jug. The leprechaun sat on that stool with a hammer in his hand, pounding the nails into the sole of a shoe. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, clickety-clack. That was the sound that Tom had heard. Now he watched as the leprechaun put down his work, grabbed his mug, climbed up that ladder, and dipped that mug into that gallon-sized jug of ale, and then climbed back down the ladder and continued to work on that shoe. Tom Fitzpatrick got a little bit closer. He said, "Blessings on your good work, sir. But why are you working on a holiday?" The leprechaun didn't even look up, but he scowled and said, "If I work on a holiday, that's not my business, none of your own. You should be more worried about your father's cows. They have just broken out of the barn and now they're knocking down all the corn." "The cows? The corn?" And Tom Fitzpatrick almost looked away, but he was much too clever to be tricked by that leprechaun. Instead, he opened the bushes and in one movement, he grabbed that leprechaun up into his fists. The leprechaun squirmed and wiggled, but Tom held tight. He said, "Now you're going to show me where you buried your gold." The leprechaun said, "Oh, Tom Fitzpatrick, I'm just a poor leprechaun. I don't have any gold." But Tom knew he had to scare the leprechaun, so he made a terrible face. And he said, "You'll show me where your gold is." The leprechaun stopped squirming. He said, "Tom Fitzpatrick, you're much too clever a man. I will have to tell you where I buried my gold." Tom held tight as the leprechaun gave Tom directions, only he led Tom over 3 big hills. Then he led him through a muddy ditch. He led him under a row of bushes and all the way across a peat bog. Tom thought he was being fooled, but when they came out of that peat bog, they were standing in a beautiful field, and that field was filled with yellow flowers. In Ireland, they call them bouillons. We call them goldenrod. The leprechaun in Tom's fist pointed down to one of those yellow flowers and said, "Tom Fitzpatrick, if you dig underneath that yellow flower, you will find my fortune in gold." Tom was so excited he let go of the leprechaun. He said, today I'm going to earn my fortune. But wait, I have to go home and get my shovel if I'm going to dig underneath this flower. When I come back, how am I going to know which yellow flower has your gold underneath it? Well, then Tom thought of a plan, and he reached down and he untied the garter that was holding up his socks. It was a bright red garter, and he took that garter and he tied it around that yellow flower so he would know which one to dig under when he got back with his shovel. Now, after he had tied that garter, he looked down at the leprechaun and said, now, you're not going to untie that red garter while I go home and get my shovel. And that leprechaun put his hands on his hips, looked up at Tom Fitzpatrick and said, I promise you, I will not take the red garter off of that flower. And Tom knew that if a leprechaun makes a promise, they have to keep it. The leprechaun said, now that you know where my gold is, I don't suppose you'll be needing me any longer. Can I be off? And Tom Fitzpatrick said, oh yes, good man, you can be off. The last thing the leprechaun said was, goodbye, Tom Fitzpatrick. I hope you're happy with what you find. And off he ran through the yellow flowers. Tom Fitzpatrick left the field and went home to get his shovel. He was dreaming about all the things that he was going to buy with his gold. And when he came back, he had his shovel on his shoulder and he walked into that field of flowers. And when he looked up, he saw that every yellow flower in that field had a red garter tied around it, as far as the eye could see. Tom said, how am I ever going to know which flower to dig under to find my gold? He thought he recognized the flower that he had tied his garter to. So he took that shovel of his and he dug underneath that flower, but there was no gold. He dug underneath the flower next to it. No gold. He went and dug the flower on the other side, and you know there was no gold. Tom Fitzpatrick spent the day digging up all the flowers in that field to the east, but he found no fortune in gold. He spent the rest of the day digging up all the flowers to the west. No gold. When the moon was rising in the night sky, Tom Fitzpatrick started digging up all the yellow flowers to the north. And when the moon was setting and it was nearly morning, why, he had dug up all the flowers to the south. When the sun rose in the morning sky, Tom Fitzpatrick had dug up over 200 flowers and never found the gold. A very tired and discouraged Tom Fitzpatrick put his shovel on his shoulder and headed for home. But after that day, he never went anywhere without his shovel. And Tom Fitzpatrick said, I am such a clever man that the next time I capture that leprechaun, why, that will be the day that I earn my fortune in gold. So in that story, we can see how leprechauns are very clever. And did they trick Tom Fitzpatrick? Oh yeah, they tricked him really well. So I want to sing a song with you before we enter into the next story. And it's a song about fairies because our next story is going to be about a fairy with a magic wand. Now in this song, our fairies going marketing. And I know that sounds a little strange, but what going marketing means is going shopping. But this fairy is going shopping at a market and she's going to buy 4 things. So I want to show you some motions that are going to go with our song. So the first thing that the fairy is going to buy is a fish. So I want you to make a fish with your hand and let's do this, a little fish. The second thing that this fairy is going to buy at the market is a bright red bird. So let's make a birdie's beak with our fingers. The third thing our fairy is going to buy at the market is a winter coat. So let's put it on one arm and we'll put our coat on the other arm and we'll button it up. 3 buttons, 1, 2, and 3. And the last thing our fairy is going to buy at the market is a little mouse. So we're going to do mousy ears and then we're going to do this with our nose for the whiskers. So a little mouse. Here's the song. A fairy went a-marketing. She bought a little fish. She placed it in a crystal bowl upon a golden dish. All day she sat wondering She watched its silver gleam, and then she gently scooped it up and freed it in the stream. A fairy went a-marketing. She brought a bright red bird. It sang the most beautiful song that she had ever heard. She sat beside its painted cage and listened half the day. And then she opened up the doors and let it fly away. A fairy went a-marketing. She bought a winter coat. Here we go. One arm, put it on the other arm. 3 buttons. 1, 2, 3. It was stitched about with gossamer and pockets for to tote. She wore it one cold winter day with warmth and delight, and then she gave it to a frog to keep him warm at night. A fairy went a-marketing. She bought a little mouse to send her tiny messages and clean her tiny house. She kept it busy all day long, pattering to and fro, and then she kissed its silken ears, said thanks, and let it go. A fairy went a-marketing. I hope you enjoyed that song. So that leads us into our next story, which is a story about a fairy with a magic wand. So let me grab my magic wand. All right. So I made this magic wand, and you can make one at home too. You know what I used? The base of the magic wand I got at the hardware store. It's a paint stick. So you go to the paint department, and when you buy a gallon of paint, they usually give you a stick to stir that paint up. Now you don't have to buy paint. You can just go into the hardware store and ask them if you can have a stir stick, and I bet they'll give you one. So I covered it with that lovely fancy duct tape that you see out now. It's duct tape with designs on it. So I covered it with tape, and then I cut 2 yellow stars out of construction paper, and I glued them together on the top of the stick. And then I took some sparkly fuzzy sticks and I tied them around the top of the stick, and I made a magic wand. So I hope you'll do this too. So the fairy in our story has a magic wand and lives in the house of a young person, although this young person never saw the fairy that lived in their house until one day when that young person was sitting in their room and they were bored. Have you ever felt bored before? Yeah. So here's what that young person looked like. So I want you to put your head in your hands like this. And I want you to get the most bored face, snarly face that you can make. And I want you to repeat after me what that young person was saying that day. You ready? I'm bored. I have nothing to do. I have no one to play with. I'll just sit here and stew. Now, while that young person was feeling bored and snarly in their room, all of a sudden, a fairy appeared in front of them with a magic wand. And the fairy looked up and said, "What is wrong with you today?" The young person looked down and said, "Who are you?" Well, the fairy looked up and said, "I'm the fairy that has always lived in your house." "Well, I've never seen you before." The fairy said, "I know, but I have helped you many times. You just didn't know that it was me." "Well, why are you here today?" She said, "I heard you. I heard what you were saying. Now what's wrong?" And the young person said, "I'm bored. I have nothing to do. I have no one to play with. I'll just sit here and stew." And that fairy looked up and said, "Oh my goodness, you should never be bored, not as long as you use your imagination." And the young person said, "What do you mean?" Well, the fairy said, "Well, okay, do you have a favorite story?" And the young person perked up and said, "Oh, yes, my favorite story is Peter Pan." The fairy said, "Now, what do you know about Peter Pan?" The young person said, "Peter and Wendy and all the children live in a place called Never Never Land, and they don't ever have to grow up." The fairy said, "Good. So I want you to go to Never Never Land in your imagination and tell me who else is there." The young person said, "Oh, there's pirates in Never Never Land, and the best pirate is Captain Hook. Arg!" The fairy said, "Now you're getting there. What would Captain Hook say?" And the young person said, well, he would talk like a pirate and say, arg. So you want to try this? You want to talk like a pirate? Let's get our hooks up. Ready? Arg. And then the fairy waved her magic wand, and all of a sudden, there was a pirate's hat. And that young person put on the pirate's hat. The fairy said, now what else would a pirate say? The young person thought about that and said, well, they would say, shiver me timbers. Want to talk like a pirate? Let's say that one. Shiver me timbers. And the fairy said, what else would your pirate say? And the young person said, ho, 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 and a glass of milk. So let's do that, shall we? Ho, 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 and a glass of milk. And using their imagination, off that young person went, out of their bedroom, down the steps, and outside, talking like a pirate. Arg! All of a sudden, down the street, the young person heard a sound. It sounded like this. Arr! And because they were using their imagination, they said, there's a fire somewhere. I can be a fire person. I will help put out that fire. And just like magic, that pirate's hat transformed. And when that pirate's hat transformed, why, it turned into the hat of the fire chief. Well, that young person put on the fire chief's hat and went down the road. And because they were using their imagination, all of a sudden they had a great big fire hose in their hands, and they were spraying water, helping to put out that fire. And once that fire was out, well, the young person forgot to turn off their imaginary hose. And that water flowed and flowed out of that hose until the entire street was flooded. It wasn't a street anymore. Now it was a river. And that young person looked at the river that was flowing down their street and said, the only way that I can get down that river is if I have a, what do you think? Is if I have a boat. And so just like magic, that fire chief's hat turned into a boat. That young person jumped into that boat and started flowing down the river that used to be his street. Well, that boat went out into the ocean on the river. And the young person thought, if I'm in the ocean, I better start looking for things that I might see in the ocean, like pirates or sharks, or maybe an octopus. And while they were imagining all the things that live in the ocean, all of a sudden, a great big storm started to brew. And the wind started to blow, and that boat was being knocked about on the waves, when all of a sudden, that boat hit a rock. And when they hit that rock, why, it tore off the very front of the boat. And when the boat's front was gone, the boat turned around and hit that rock again. And when they hit that rock again, why, it tore off the back of the boat. The wind blew with so much strength that the wind tore off the sail. So without a front and without a back and without a sail, what do you think is going to happen to that boat? It's going to sink. That boat went down and down and down to the very bottom of the ocean, but that young person was using their imagination. And all of a sudden, they decided to imagine that their boat had turned into a life jacket. They put that life jacket on, and now that they were safe, they swam and they swam to the surface of the water. And then they swam to the shore, and when they got out of the water, they dried themselves off. Well, right at that time, a truck pulled up, and in that truck was the young person's mom. And oh, she was so worried. She got out of the truck and said, "Where have you been? I've been so worried about you." But the young person looked up and said, "Oh, Mom, there was nothing to worry about. I was just using my imagination. I was imagining my story, and I had a great adventure." Mom said, "Get in the truck." So they climbed into that Chevy truck, and they drove away. But from that day forward, that young person was never bored again, for they knew that all they had to do was imagine their story. That's a story called The Young Person and the Fairy, and I hope you liked it. So I want to show you today a craft project that you can make at home. And let me put my fairy wand back up here in the magic hat. And so today what I'm going to show you is how to make a fairy door. And after you make this fairy door, you can put it up somewhere in your house, and maybe you will one day meet the fairy that lives in your house. So let me show you a couple of the fairy doors that I've already made so you can get some idea. Here's one, very colorful, right? And here's another fairy door, just a little bit different, right? So I'm going to show you how to make these, and here's what you need in order to make a fairy door. The first thing you need is a pair of scissors, and I want you to be really careful with those. So if you are a younger person, you might have smaller scissors that are plastic with a protection guard on them. If you're someone who's not using scissors yet, you might want to ask a big person if they'll help you do the cutting in this project, right? So you need a pair of scissors, and you will need some glue. Now I like using the tacky glue because it doesn't take so long to dry. So I'm going to be using tacky glue today. Then you're going to need a 3x5 piece of cardboard or tag board. Now today I'm using a 3x5 card that I got in the office supply section at the store. I like these because there's lines on the 3x5 card, and that's going to help me line up my popsicle sticks when I glue them down to my card. So the next thing that you're going to need are popsicle sticks. Now, if you've been eating a lot of popsicles this summer, you might have saved those popsicle sticks. But I ordered a bag of colorful popsicle sticks from the store. And so I'm going to be using those today. You don't have to use colored popsicle sticks. You can use regular ones. And then if you do, you can paint those or maybe use your markers to decorate the door. This is another example of bigger popsicle sticks called tongue depressors. And this card is 5x7 inches. If you want to make a bigger fairy door, you can use the tongue depressors and a 5x7 card to make that door as well. Right? So here's how it works. You are going to take the 3x5 card. You're going to take your glue, whatever glue you're using, and you're going to make lines up and down on the 3x5 card. I'm going to follow the lines on my card. It makes it a little easier to know where the glue goes because that's where my popsicle sticks are going to go. And so I'm making lines up and down the stripes on the 3x5 card with my glue. Not too much, you know how messy glue can get, right? So it looks like this. Now I'm going to take popsicle sticks and I'm going to start lining them up on the 3x5 card like this, okay, next to each other. And what's great about the 3x5 card is it'll take exactly 8 popsicle sticks to go all the way across, and they fit perfectly. So there's 2. I'm just picking them out at random here, so it's going to be a very colorful fairy door. And 4 popsicle sticks, 5, 6. I'll show it to you when I get them on here. 7 and 8. All right, so it's going to look like this when you put your popsicle sticks on your glue, right? So I'm going to let this one dry, and I made one earlier that's already dry so I can show you the next step. So here's what we just did. Glued our popsicle sticks on the 3x5 card. Now there's a little bit of card sticking out on the bottom, and you can leave it there if you like it, or you can cut it off if you want a solid wooden door. So I'm going to cut it off of the bottom like this. And then you'll have a solid wooden door made out of popsicle sticks. Now the fairy door needs to be decorated. So I looked around in my craft box and I had some leftover stickers. And then I went into my office supply drawer in my desk and I had some other stickers. So I'm going to decorate the fairy door. And the first thing I'm going to do is put a window up here. I found a flower sticker in my craft box, and I thought that would make a lovely fairy door window. So they're going to look out of a flowered shaped window. And this one, it had that sticky back on it, right? So I could just take the sticky back off and put it on there. You can make the window out of anything you want. It could be a button, or you could cut out another piece of paper and make a window and glue it on. So you can make your fairy door window out of anything you want. But I made a flower door window. Now I'm going to put hinges on the door, and usually a door has 2 or 3 hinges to open with. And so I had some sparkly stickers. So I'm going to take 3 of those sparkly stickers and pretend that those are the hinges on my door. And I'm going to put one on the top. There's one hinge. I'm going to put one in the middle and one on the bottom of my fairy door. one in the middle, and then one on the bottom. So let me show you the hinges. Now the last thing I think I need is a doorknob. So I went into the office stickers, and I had these stickers that you put on file folders, or sometimes you use them in a garage sale to mark things with the price. And so I'm gonna pick off the yellow one because it looks like a great big doorknob to me, and put a big doorknob on my fairy door. Okay, so easy to make fairy door, very quick and easy. Make sure the glue is all dried on your popsicle sticks before you decorate your fairy door, right? And now you can put that fairy door up somewhere in the house, usually down low, right? And who knows, you might meet the fairy that lives in your house. And if you leave out a tiny little cup of milk and they drink that milk, well, the next day they're gonna have to do all your chores. And you know what? If you can figure out what their name is, you will have a friend for life. So I hope you'll make a fairy door. So we're going to end our time together today. I hope you've enjoyed the magical stories and songs that we've shared today. Maybe you'll make a fairy wand, or maybe you'll make a fairy door, and I hope you have fun with those projects. So we're going to end our time together with the farewell song. It's going to sound a lot like our welcome song in the tune, but the words are different, and so is the sign language. So to sing our farewell song, we need to learn the sign language for time. So I want you to pretend that you have a wristwatch on, and you're going to point to your watch, and we're going to say time. We're going to say the word go. So take your two fingers, your index fingers, and go like this, go. So it's time for us to go. We're going to say the word now. So put your thumbs out and your pinky fingers and go like this, now. It's time for us to go now, right? And the last part of this song is I will see. So take your two fingers like eyes and bring them away from your eyes. I will see you next. You're going to put one hand in front of the other and bring your back hand over your front hand. Next time. So I will see you next time. You ready to sing it? We'll do it slow first, and then we'll do it a little bit faster, right? It's time for us to go now, go now, go now. It's time for us to go now. I'll see you next time. Ready to do it a little faster? Right. It's time for us to go now, go now, go now. It's time for us to go now. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful summer, everyone. I hope that you will use your imagination and find yourself imagining your story many times this summer. I'll see you next time.